All right, you're welcome back from that short break. Before we went there, we were establishing contact with Nwachinemere Emeka, an agricultural value chain expert, and we wanted to deal with the issue of the impact of COVID-19 on food security. Emeka, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Hello, Emeka, can you hear me? All right.
Yes, I can. Clearly.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Reports have said that, that we just read a few minutes ago, especially by the Food Agriculture Organization, has said that prices of agricultural produce have plummeted. Yet, we see that in the markets, prices of food in retail stores have, have increased exponentially. A tuber of yam that you could buy for 800 naira in the first place, pre-COVID, now sells for as much as 1,500 naira or even more, depending on the location where you are. Also, Exporters Association of Nigeria are in a dilemma as the demand for agricultural commodities have flattened. Of course, people have closed their borders. They don't want people to bring stuff in, both human and things. Does this spell doom somehow? Because people are worried that this could bring about shortage of food at some point after the COVID-19 impact has lessened. Do you think this is going to bring about food security issues for us later?
Absolutely. If we don't make some changes, that's exactly what's going to happen. First of all, we have to realize that Nigeria is food security insufficient already. That is pre-COVID-19, we had several issues that have affected food security. If you look at food security itself, it's not just a measure of the availability of food, it's also the ability of people to be able to afford it. Now, if you look at that from that context, you will see what the situation really is. Nigeria is a net importer of food, and at the moment, borders are closed. Several countries where most of our imports coming from have banned the export of food. The implication is that processed food, much of which is what is stocked in our shops, if this continues, there will be available food for people to buy. But that's not just what the problem is. The pandemic itself has led to several organizations to lay off staff. Nigerians spend 60% of their incomes on food. The implication is that if buying power should go down, as it will with layoffs and net reduction in available jobs, it means people will not have enough money to be able to purchase food. Now, if you look at all these things from the lenses of the value chain itself, and that's talking about inputs, markets, finance, mobility, you will begin to see how these challenges are in the first place. In terms of inputs, majority of our pesticides are imported. So from the production side of things, it becomes very, very difficult for farmers to access some herbicides aside what is probably already stocked up. So you already we are experiencing an increase in the price of inputs, a range of 11 to 24%. Already farmers rely on input financing to be able to produce. So with the price increasing, that creates some level of challenge already. Some federal companies are already at the moment doing skeletal productions. So that is going to be a huge impact on production. Now remember that we are a net importer of food. So as a net importer of food, the only way we are going to ensure that there is food security is if we ramp up production. If there are limitations in the availability of inputs, then that means that we are not going to produce enough for everyone, which means there is going to be food shortages. Now, if you look at mobility, if we don't have enough access to trucks to move produce or inputs out of the farm or to the market, that is a huge challenge. It means that even whatever is produced cannot get to where it is needed. If you look at some states, places like Abuja, if you want to move, say, inputs or produce to different parts of Nigeria, you are probably going to pass through Abuja, Lokoja. Now, these places are locked down. Much of the inputs, the ones that are in storage, will have to pass through Lagos. So mobility is very, very crucial. If it is not managed very, very well, it's going to have a very, very profound effect on production. Again, I've mentioned the market and people's buying power. If people are not buying, it's not an incentive for production itself. Much more heavily impacted is perishables already, perishable commodities. So if these things cannot be lifted out from the farms, it's going to incur very, very huge post-harvest losses. Presently, post-harvest losses for perishables like vegetables and fruits, it's already at the 60% per annum range. Now imagine if people are not picking this up at most of our urban centers like Lagos and Abuja. That's some of the implications for food security in Nigeria.
Emeka, this is where I'll come in. I have a question to ask about preservation of food, because that's an issue that we've already had, you know, from whenever anybody can remember. Lots of this produce, like what we heard, the association of the people who export agricultural produce, they say the price of the cocoa is determined by the weight. Now, since they can't take it out, it has to stay in, and the weight reduces a whole lot. Now, we have an issue with preservation. What can we do to help at this particular point in time? Power supply issues, infrastructure issues. What can we do at this point in time to help keep our products, you know, preserved, you know, for post-COVID, hopefully?
Thank you for that question. Clearly, we have very, very huge challenges in terms of infrastructure for agriculture. We don't have we don't have adequate storage facilities, silos, and even the ones we have, it's a challenge in itself. But I think one of the things we can begin to do, while it's not, while I won't say it's the best approach, it's something that could be considered, and that is to look inwards to see how we can adapt existing local means of preservation as palliatives. For instance, in some of these rural communities, you will see they set up mud silos, and after drying some of these grains, they store them there. They build it in such a way that it is elevated and free from pests like termites, and the ability of the material used will make the contents preserved for a relative period of time. However, even if we say we are going to bring in modern silos, I think it's a little too late. We can also use empty spaces and try to use them as storage facilities. That's talking about warehousing, and I think organizations like Afex Commodities Exchange would be quite very, very crucial in this regard, seeing that they have a network of silos and warehouses. But I think, again, other organizations need to step in, because ordinarily these farmers will not have access to these storage facilities. So there is need for other organizations to step up, buy this of these farmers, and be able to get these things aggregated in quantities that make economic sense to store them in these silos. And then, because typically the challenge with storage is that these farmers need this money today. And if they are going to store it, it's going to have a huge impact on their incomes. So if other organizations that play in this space can step up, buy these commodities of farmers, and then be able to interact with big organizations like AFEX, who can provide storage for them, it will go a long way to making sure that some of these things stay preserved. But again, that is talking mostly for some of these export-bound cash crops. But for other other crops that have export potential, things like cassava, there are no easy ways to store them, except adding some level of value to them. And that's by maybe drying the cassava, turning them into cassava chips, or converting them into starch. That way it can store much longer. So finding ways to add value is the only way to make sure that there is a way to increase the shelf life of these commodities. Aside that, it's going to be quite very, very difficult.
Emeka, I've been trying to call your attention for quite a while. It looks like you are pretty passionate about this storage, the storage thingy. Speaking of other organizations joining in the fight against food and insecurity, what palliative measures, we're talking about palliative measures for the poor people, palliative measures for organizations, what palliative measures do you think the government would have to put in place to help these farmers achieve the aim of food security in Nigeria? Because the government would eat, the people at the NCDC would eat, the patients would have to eat as well, and every other person. So these people are pretty needed. What palliative measures do you think can be put in place to help them?
Okay, that's a rather very interesting question. From my experience in the agricultural sector, one of the key factors that help unlock the potential of farms is usually finance. And while we've seen and heard of several government intervention programs, they have not necessarily been very, very well aligned in terms of outcomes. So we talk about the Anchor Borrowers Program, and recently the Microfinance Bank Initiative of NISAL. So if we are going to come out of this very, very good, there needs to be a very, very huge alignment between intention and outcome on the side of the government and other bodies that are providing finance to farmers. There has to be a way to get cheap finance to farmers, especially in the event of increasing input price hike, to make sure that farmers are able to afford high quality inputs. Because if the farmers are not able to afford these inputs or pay for mechanization, it's going to be difficult. Why? Because over 70% of our food production is done by small-scale farmers, and they rely largely on labor. But this labor is usually provided by farmhands from neighboring countries like Benin and Togo. But with this pandemic, a lot of them have left. So it is very, very important that intervention programs that are aimed maybe to put some of these smallholder farmers into clusters and then provide mechanization for them in the face of the labor flight. This has to be put in place in such a way that you don't necessarily have to give the farmers cash, but you ensure that there is input, there is an access to mechanization, and more importantly, there has to be a way to guarantee that there is market at the end of the day. So what would make sure that the farmers work hard, we use whatever is provided, and the government does not
Yeah,
go
we'll
on a
have to move
wild
on with the
goose
rest
chase
of the
in terms
show,
of
but your
producing
contribution to this particular topic has been pretty immense. We'll be speaking with Nwachinemere Emeka, an agricultural value chain expert, and we've been trying to get an insight into the issue of food security and what happens post-COVID. So